The emergency room doors exploded inward at 2:17 in the afternoon, and nobody moved. 4 armed men walked through shattered glass like they owned the building. Doctors pressed themselves against walls. A patient in a wheelchair started crying. Security reached for radios with shaking hands. Everyone looked for someone to tell them what to do, and their eyes landed on the wrong person. They landed on a nurse in faded blue scrubs holding a clipboard, standing perfectly still in the middle of the hallway. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't running. She was reading the room the way a chess player reads a board. And then she did something no one expected. She gave an order. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is only getting started and you do not want to watch part 2 without having seen everything that comes before it. Drop a like if the hook already got your heart rate up, and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from right now? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go. The hospital was called Harlan Cross Medical Center, and it sat on the edge of Delbrook, a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest where the mountains met the gray sprawl of industrial neighborhoods and the rain came in sideways most of the year. It was the kind of hospital that served everyone, the mill workers, the veterans, the people who couldn't afford anywhere else. 312 beds, a trauma bay that hadn't been renovated since the 90s, a staff that ran lean, worked long, and kept the whole operation held together with institutional tape and sheer stubbornness. Nurse Sera Vance had worked the emergency department for 6 years. She was 34 years old, medium height, lean in a way that looked like it came from movement rather than maintenance. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same practical knot every shift. She wore no jewelry, kept her badge clipped to her left pocket. She had a habit of standing slightly to the side of doorways rather than in the center of them, a thing she'd stopped noticing herself doing years ago. The staff liked her well enough, in the way you like someone competent and undemanding. She showed up on time. She documented cleanly. She didn't complain when double shifts turned into triple shifts, and she had never once, in 6 years, raised her voice at a patient or a colleague. But nobody really knew her. That was by design. She arrived for her Tuesday afternoon shift at 1:45 p.m., which meant she was 15 minutes early, which meant she was exactly on time by her own internal standard. The ER was already running hot. 3 trauma cases from a highway accident on Route 9, a walk-in with chest pain that turned out to be a panic attack, and a pediatric fever case that the attending physician was watching closely. The department smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly the way they always did in the winter months. Sera changed, checked the board, picked up her assignment, and started moving. Her floor supervisor, a heavy-set man named Terrence Woolley, caught her at the nurse's station. Terrence was competent at paperwork and poor at people, which made him a frustrating supervisor and an adequate administrator. He had a habit of stating the obvious with the gravity of someone delivering classified intelligence. "We've got a security upgrade situation on the West Wing," he told her, not looking up from his clipboard. "Military transfer, defense patient in 412. I need you to keep your people away from that corridor." "Who authorized the transfer?" "Above my pay grade." He finally looked up. "I'm just telling you, the hallway's restricted." "For how long?" "Until it isn't." He turned back to his clipboard. "Keep your people out." Sera didn't argue. She nodded once, filed the information, and walked away. Room 412 was a private room at the end of the West Wing, which shared a corridor with the trauma recovery bay. A defense patient meant federal involvement, which meant the facility had agreed to receive someone under some form of protective custody or medical transfer arrangement with the military or a federal agency. It happened 3 or 4 times a year at Harlan Cross. Usually went quietly. Usually nobody made a big deal of it. She glanced down the west corridor once as she passed the junction. 2 men in civilian clothes stood outside 412. Not hospital security. Something else. She clocked their posture, their footwear, the way one of them kept his right arm slightly loose at his side. She kept walking. The next 40 minutes were ordinary. Then the Special Operations Unit arrived. They came in 2 vehicles, a black SUV and a military transport van, and they moved through the hospital entrance like they were clearing a building. 6 men in tactical gear with equipment cases, two in civilian attire who were obviously in charge, and a seventh man she couldn't immediately classify, who stayed near the rear and watched everything without appearing to watch anything. The unit leader was a man named Captain Brock Okafor. He was tall, broad across the chest, with the kind of controlled physicality that came from years of maintaining peak condition as a professional standard rather than a personal preference. He spoke to the hospital administrator with the brisk efficiency of someone who had delivered the same briefing to 100 different facilities and found all of them equally inconvenient. Sera was passing the main desk when Okafor's team moved through. She stepped to the side to let them pass. One of the junior operators, a younger man, maybe 26, with a jaw that probably got him recruited into recruitment posters, glanced at her and made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He said something to the man beside him, something she didn't catch, but she caught the gesture that went with it, the small dismissive tilt of the chin toward her. Hospital staff, background, irrelevant. She'd seen that look before. In different uniforms, different settings, same exact message. She kept moving. The unit set up on the west wing. They established a perimeter around room 412 that now extended to the entire corridor, which pushed 3 of Sera's patients into rooms that weren't optimally configured for their conditions. The post-surgical case in 415 needed the monitoring setup in that room. The geriatric fall patient in 411 had mobility constraints that made the new room assignment genuinely dangerous. Sera went to the administrative desk and requested a meeting with Captain Okafor through the hospital liaison. 20 minutes later, she received a response through the same channel. The unit's positioning was non-negotiable. The hospital was to accommodate the security requirements. If there were medical concerns, they could be addressed by flagging issues through the liaison. She went back to the desk and wrote 3 separate flags through the liaison system in 12 minutes. Detailed, specific, medically grounded. She received 3 form responses that indicated the concerns had been noted. She rerouted her patients herself, requested additional equipment from Central Supply, and made the configurations work. Okafor's men moved through the floor with the confidence of people who had never once considered that the building they were in might belong to someone else. They used the staff break room. They parked equipment in the corridor junction. One of them, a heavy-set operator named something she heard as Graves, moved a medication cart without asking anyone to make room for a cot he was assembling near the stairwell exit. "That cart has controlled substances on it," Sera said. She wasn't loud. She wasn't sharp. She said it the way you say something that is simply true. Graves looked at her, then at the cart, then back at her. "I'll be careful," he said. "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to put it back." He held eye contact for a moment in the particular way that men sometimes do when they're deciding whether a woman is worth arguing with. Then he moved the cart back. Not graciously, but he moved it. She documented the interaction, not to escalate, because documentation was what you did. By 2 p.m., Sera had covered half her patient rounds, resolved a scheduling conflict with the pharmacy, and talked a 17-year-old with a dislocated shoulder through the reduction procedure with enough calm that the kid stopped white-knuckling the gurney rail by the time she was finished. His mother had been standing in the corner trying not to cry. When the procedure was done and the kid's face smoothed out with relief, the mother looked at Sera like she'd done something remarkable. Sera handed the kid an ice pack and told him to keep it elevated and stop throwing whatever he'd been throwing. He almost smiled. "How'd you know I was throwing something?" "It's always something." She made a note in his chart. "Follow up in 5 days." She was walking back toward the nurse's station when she heard the first sound. It wasn't loud. That was the thing nobody tells you. The way sudden violence often announces itself quietly before it announces itself completely. A pop. A shout that cut off too fast, then glass. A lot of glass, falling and breaking in a way that had a specific weight to it, a specific finality that the body recognizes before the mind catches up. Sera was already moving before the second sound. She rounded the corner into the main ER corridor and stopped. 4 men had come through the front entrance. The doors were destroyed. Not shattered, but blown in. The frame bent, safety glass scattered in a long fan across the floor. 3 of the men were armed. The 4th carried equipment. A bag, something technical, something she filed and moved past. They wore civilian clothing over what she could read as soft body armor under the fabric at the shoulders and chest. No masks. That was interesting. No masks meant they weren't planning on leaving witnesses who could describe them, or they weren't planning on being here long enough for it to matter. The ER floor had gone completely silent. A doctor near the intake desk had pressed herself against the wall. A nurse's aide had dropped behind the registration counter. Two patients in the waiting area had frozen in their chairs like prey animals, hoping stillness made them invisible. One of the armed men pointed his weapon at the ceiling and said loudly, "Nobody moves. Everybody stays where they are. We are leaving in 3 minutes and nobody gets hurt." They weren't here for the hospital. They were here for room 412. Sera's mind ran the math in about 2 seconds. The timing, the prior transfer, the defense patient, the federal involvement. Someone knew that patient was here. Someone had planned this extraction with enough lead time to get 4 men and a technical bag to the front entrance of a hospital in the middle of the afternoon, which meant this wasn't opportunistic. It was deliberate, which meant they had done reconnaissance, which meant they had a plan for the security already in place. She stepped back around the corner before anyone tracked her movement. The stairwell was 15 feet to her left. She moved to it, opened the door slowly, and went up 1 flight. Second floor. She needed line of sight to the west wing without coming through the main corridor. Her hands were steady. That had always been the thing she couldn't explain to people who asked what combat training actually did for you. It didn't make you fearless. It made your hands steady. Your mind kept moving forward because stopping was worse than moving, and your hands stayed steady because shaking hands killed people faster than bad decisions did. She came out on the second floor and moved to the internal window that overlooked the West Wing junction from above. She could see the stairwell exit on that wing. She could see 2 of Okafor's men in a defensive crouch behind an overturned equipment cart. They were pinned. The 2 armed intruders who had broken off from the main group had come up the other stairwell and were pushing toward 412 from the east. She had maybe 90 seconds before they reached the room. She also had a clear picture of what Okafor's men didn't. The 3rd armed man from the lobby group hadn't followed the other 2. He'd looped around. She'd caught his movement through the window. He was using the laundry service corridor on the ground floor, which ran parallel to the west wing and had an access hatch into the janitor's closet 4 rooms down from 412. He was going to come in from behind Okafor's defensive position. She found the nearest internal phone, dialed the security station on the ground floor, and got a man named Dillard who answered on the second ring, which meant he was either very good or had nothing else happening. "This is Vance, ER floor, extension 441. I need you to listen very carefully and not repeat anything back to me until I'm finished." She told him about the laundry corridor, the access hatch, the position of the 3rd armed man. She told him which janitor's closet and how far it was from 412. She told him to relay that information to the military unit on the West Wing using the fastest method available and not to move toward the area himself. "Who are you?" Dillard said. "Sera Vance, nurse, extension 441. Go." She hung up. Then she went back down the stairwell, back to the ER floor, and started moving patients. This was the part that required a different kind of discipline. The ER had 11 occupied bays and a waiting area with 9 people in it when the intrusion started. 6 of the bay patients were mobile or partially mobile. 5 were not. The waiting area patients were panicking in that particular frozen way that was actually more dangerous than screaming because frozen people didn't follow directions. She went to the waiting area first. "Listen to me." She said it at a volume that was just above conversational, and something in the register of it cut through the ambient panic the way a tuning fork cuts through background noise. People looked at her. "We are moving to the back corridor through that door. You're going to stand up, you're going to stay low, and you're going to move in a single line. Do not run. Do not talk. Follow me." A man in his 50s, heavy-set work boots, the kind of man who usually ignored instructions from women half his size, looked at her and then stood up first. Everyone followed him. She moved the waiting area patients into the back corridor in under 90 seconds, handed them off to an aide who had materialized from somewhere, and went back for the bay patients. She was midway through moving the second bay patient a post-surgical woman on a mobile bed who had woken up from sedation, confused and frightened, when Captain Okafor appeared in the corridor. He was moving fast. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding into his eye, and he was pressing the heel of his hand against it. He stopped when he saw her. "The laundry corridor warning," he said. "That was you. How many of your people are injured?" "One with a shoulder hit, walking. The third man in the laundry corridor is detained." He paused, processing something. "You knew about the access point." "I've worked this floor for 6 years." She was still moving the patient's bed as she talked. "The hatch behind this janitor's closet in 408 is a maintenance access that comes out on the service corridor. Facilities uses it twice a month." He fell in and helped her move the bed. "You called it correctly," he said. "The positioning, the flanking move, all of it." "Where are the other two?" "My team has them. Contained. Not resolved." She stopped moving the bed and looked at him directly. "What does not resolved mean?" "It means they have a remote detonator for something they brought in the equipment bag, and my team can't get close enough to disarm them without triggering—" He stopped himself. Old habit. The reflex to classify. "Captain," she said it quietly, "I am not a civilian bystander. Tell me what you're working with." He looked at her. The cut above his eye was still bleeding. She reached into her scrub pocket, pulled out a strip of medical tape and a piece of gauze she'd pocketed out of habit during the patient moves. She always pocketed supplies, another old reflex that had never left her, and handed it to him. He took it, applied it without looking away from her. "The detonator is RF-based. The equipment bag has what looks like an IED configuration. The two men have taken a position in the main junction of the West Wing, and they are using 3 of my people as shields." She was already thinking. The RF range on a device that size, given the building's construction, steel reinforcement, original 1987 build, the signal degrades significantly past 2 interior walls. If your people can get to the supply closet at the end of the east corridor, there's an interstitial space between the closet wall and the structural support that would put them effectively out of range. Okafor was very still. "How do you know the building's RF characteristics?" "I don't specifically, but I know the construction, and I know how RF degrades in that configuration from similar structures." "Similar structures." He said it carefully, the way you repeat something when you're revising your understanding of a situation. "Move your people to the supply closet," she said. "I'll tell you how to create a distraction that doesn't require anyone to enter their line of sight." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, a small recalibration, like a compass finding north. "Talk," he said. She talked. The plan took 4 minutes to communicate and 8 minutes to execute. Sera positioned herself at the secondary nursing station on the West Wing's north end, which had a direct intercom connection to the corridor speakers. At her signal, the overhead PA system ran a sequence of emergency alerts: fire suppression, chemical spill protocol, and a cardiac code, in a pattern she'd chosen specifically because it would force the 2 men to move their positions to maintain visual on the only exits that mattered in a fire evacuation scenario. They moved exactly where she predicted. Okafor's team had a clear approach. The whole thing was over in 11 seconds once the team moved. When the federal tactical units arrived 4 minutes later, black SUVs, full tactical deployment, the whole overproduced machinery of a response that had been scrambled too slowly. They came through the destroyed front entrance of Harlan Cross Medical Center to find the situation already contained. Both intruders zip-tied and kneeling on the West Wing floor, the equipment bag secured and isolated. 3 hostages released, 1 wounded operator being treated in the corridor. Being treated by Sera Vance, who was working on the shoulder wound with the focused efficiency of someone who had sutured worse in considerably worse conditions. The federal team leader, a woman in a dark jacket whose badge said Patel, stopped in the corridor entrance and looked at the scene. She looked at the kneeling men, at the secured bag, at the released hostages, at Okafor standing near the wall with a gauze strip taped above his eye. Then she looked at Sera. "Who ran the containment?" she said. Okafor turned his head and looked at Sera, and in that look was the full weight of everything he'd revised about her in the past 45 minutes. "She did," he said. Sera finished tying off the suture on the shoulder wound snipped the thread, applied the dressing, and pressed the operator's hand over it to hold pressure. "Keep pressure on that," she told him. Then she stood up, pulled off her gloves, and looked at Agent Patel. "I need to get back to my patients," she said, and she walked back toward the ER. Behind her, nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. Nobody seemed to know exactly what had just happened. They only knew that something had, and that the woman who had made it happen was already rounding the corner with her clipboard, heading back to the floor she'd never stopped covering, back to the work that had never stopped being the work. While the people who'd arrived too late stood in the corridor trying to figure out how to write a report that explained what they'd found when they got there, what none of them knew yet, what Sera had not told anyone, what lived in her records under security clearances that had never been formally revoked, was that before Harlan Cross, before the nursing degree, before the 6 years of ER shifts and medication carts, and 17-year-olds with dislocated shoulders, there had been a different version of her. A version that had spent 8 years in the Army, most of them with the 75th Ranger Regiment's medical support element, in places that didn't show up on civilian maps. A version that had run exactly this kind of containment operation before. Not in a hospital, in buildings that looked much worse than this one, with considerably less to work with, and with people shooting back. She had come home. She had built a quiet life. She had made herself useful in ways that required no story, no explanation, no acknowledgement from anyone. But the instincts were still there. They had always been there. And on the 4th floor nursing station of Harlan Cross Medical Center, under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a department that needed renovation and was always 2 nurses short, Sera Vance picked up her clipboard, checked her patient list, and went back to work. Down the hall, Agent Patel was on her phone asking questions that would, within the hour, lead her to a file that had been buried under 3 levels of administrative paperwork and 1 very quiet declassification request. What she found in that file was going to change everything. Agent Patel's phone call lasted 6 minutes. Sera knew this because she was 3 rooms down, changing a dressing on a patient's arm wound when she heard the tone shift in the corridor. That particular drop in ambient noise that happens when a conversation goes from routine to serious. She didn't look up. She finished the dressing, labeled it, told the patient to keep the arm elevated, and moved to the next room. By the time she came back to the nurse's station, Patel was standing at the end of the corridor waiting for her. Not walking toward her. Waiting. There was a difference, and Sera noticed it. "I need 5 minutes," Patel said. "I have 2 patients who need to be reassessed in the next 20 minutes. "I'll be fast." Patel gestured toward the small consultation room off the main corridor. A room with a table, 4 chairs, and a window that looked into the interior courtyard. The kind of room where doctors told families things they didn't want to hear. "Please." The please was genuine. That was also notable. Sera followed her in. Patel closed the door and didn't sit down. She was maybe 40, sharp-featured, with the kind of stillness that came from years of interviewing people in high-stakes situations. She held her phone in her left hand with the screen facing away from Sera, which meant she was managing information, which meant she'd already found something and was deciding how much of it to show. "Your file," Patel said. "The military record. I know what's in my file." "Then you know why I'm standing here instead of having a junior agent do this interview." Sera waited. 8 years, 75th Ranger Regiment medical support, 2 deployments to active combat zones, 3 commendations that are still classified at a level that required me to make a phone call to get a partial read on them. Patel paused. "And then you walked away. Nursing degree. 6 years of ER shifts at a regional hospital. No contact with DOD, no consulting, no nothing. That's all accurate. Why?" The question was direct. Sera gave it the answer it deserved. "I was done. People with your profile don't just get done. People with my profile burn out, drink themselves into something ugly, or go private sector and train security contractors for money. I didn't want any of those options." She held Patel's eye. "I wanted to do the thing I actually went in to do, take care of people. So I did it in a different building." Patel was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, processing quiet. "The containment today," she said. "The RF assessment. The PA sequence to force a position change. The flanking prediction." She ticked each item off without looking at notes, which meant she'd been running through it since she'd arrived. That's not nursing school. No, Sera said, it's not. Who else knows? Nobody here. She thought about it. Terrence Woolley knows I was in the Army. He doesn't know the specifics. I listed it on my original application and he never asked follow-up questions. Patel nodded slowly. Then she did something Sera didn't expect. She sat down. And when she sat down, something in her posture changed. The professional distance compressed slightly, the way it does when someone decides to stop performing an interview and have an actual conversation. The men we detained today, Patel said. The two in the West Wing and the one Okafor's team pulled from the laundry corridor. They're connected to a network we've been tracking for 11 months. The patient in 412 is a federal witness. Materials witness in a case involving defense contractor fraud at a level that, if it goes to trial, will take down people with very significant government adjacency. Sera said nothing. The network knew the transfer was happening. That means there's a leak somewhere between the marshal's office and the facility approval chain. Patel's voice stayed flat, but her eyes were doing more work than her voice. The attack today was not the primary operation. It was a test. They wanted to see how we'd respond to a direct extraction attempt. The actual operation, whatever it is, hasn't happened yet. The room was quiet. Why are you telling me this? Sera said. Because Okafor's team has two people who need medical support and can't be moved to a civilian facility right now without compromising the witness's location being reestablished. And because the asset in 412 is going to need a primary medical contact for the next 48 hours who isn't on any list that the leak has access to. Patel met her eyes. You're not on any current list. As far as the network's intelligence goes, you're a nurse. There it was. You want me to continue doing exactly what I've been doing, Sera said. And you want me to do it with the understanding that whoever ran the leak is likely still watching this facility. Yes. And your official request to the hospital administration for additional security resources would flag to anyone watching that we know there's a secondary operation coming. Patel's jaw tightened slightly. We can't move the witness. We can't announce the security upgrade. And I have a team that just got hit hard enough to show their limitations. Sera looked at the table for a moment. In a different version of her life, the version she'd spent 6 years quietly building, the answer to this would have been no. She'd left that life deliberately. She'd made herself a different kind of useful in a different kind of setting, and she'd done it for reasons that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with choosing what she was willing to carry. But the patient in 412 was a person. The people in the rooms on this floor were people. And whoever had walked through the front entrance today with weapons and a detonator would come back, in some form, because that was what these operations did. I'll need the medical files for Okafor's injured, she said, and I need to know what the witness in 412 requires medically. Current conditions, medications, anything that changes my protocols. Patel exhaled, not dramatically, just a small, controlled release of held tension. I'll get you everything within the hour. One more thing, Sera stood up. Okafor's team, they need to understand something. What? I'm not a resource they're managing. If I'm running medical in this facility for the next 48 hours, I'm running it. They stay out of my clinical decisions, and they stop moving hospital equipment without asking. If either of those things happens again, I'll walk out of this room and call my floor supervisor, and whatever Okafor's team needs medically will go through official channels at whatever speed official channels run. Patel looked at her for a moment. Then something that wasn't quite a smile moved across her face. I'll pass that along. Good. Sera picked up her clipboard. 48 hours. She walked out of the consultation room and back to her patients. Okafor found her 40 minutes later. She was in the supply room doing an inventory count, partly because it needed doing, partly because the supply room had a corner behind the shelving unit that was invisible from the door and gave her approximately 2 square feet of space to exist in without anyone looking at her. She'd been going at full operational tempo since 2:17 p.m., and her body was starting to register it in small ways. A faint tremor in her left hand that she'd had since a blast injury in her second deployment, a tightness behind her right eye. The supply room corner was not rest exactly. It was pressure management. She heard him in the doorway and looked up. He had a clean dressing over the cut above his eye, and someone had wiped the blood off his face. He held 2 cups of coffee, which was either perceptive or lucky, and he held one out toward her without speaking first, which meant he'd been thinking about how to approach this conversation and had landed on leading with the practical. She took the coffee. "How's your operator?" she asked. "Wallace? Shoulder's going to need surgical assessment, but he'll hold for 48 hours. He leaned against the doorframe. "Patel briefed me. I assumed she would. I owe you an apology." He said it without preamble and without the hedging quality that apologies often have when powerful people deliver them to people they'd previously underestimated. It was clean and direct. "My team came into this building and treated the staff like set dressing. That was bad practice on a good day. In the context of what actually happened today, it was embarrassing." Sera drank some of the coffee. It was bitter and too hot, which was exactly what she needed. "Your team responded well once the situation developed. That matters more than how they came in. Graves told me about the medication cart. That was minor." "It wasn't." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Vance, your record, what I was able to get from Patel, is classified for a reason. I know, I'm not asking you to brief me." He paused. "I'm asking if you're willing to work with my team for the duration. Formally, not as hospital staff supporting our operation, as a co-lead on the security and medical integration for this facility." She looked at him. He meant it. That was the thing. She'd spent enough time around military men to know the range of ways they could deliver that kind of offer. Patronizing, performative, transactional. And this wasn't any of those. He was recalibrating based on data, which was what good operators did. "I run my floor the way I run my floor," she said. "Understood. If I assess that a patient needs to be moved regardless of security positioning, that call is mine." "Agreed. And your people talk to me directly when they need something in this facility, not through liaisons, not through Wooly. Me." "Done." He finally drank some of his own coffee. "For what it's worth, the PA sequence you ran to force the position change. I've seen that tactic used in 2 field operations. I've never seen anyone improvise it in a civilian setting with hospital systems. The principle is the same. You manipulate the environment to create predictable movement. The tools were just different. Most people would have been on the floor crying." She thought about that for a second, not with pride, with something more complicated. The particular weight of knowing that your ability to stay functional in crisis is itself a product of things you've survived that you wouldn't wish on anyone. "Most people haven't had the training," she said. "That's not a character difference. It's a circumstance difference." He looked at her with the focused attention of someone genuinely recalibrating. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours. He left. She finished the coffee, completed the inventory count, and went back to her floor. The night shift came on at 7 p.m., and Sera stayed. Officially, she was covering for a nurse named Dolores Hatch, who had called in sick. Unofficially, she wasn't leaving this building until she understood the shape of what was coming. The facility had quieted in the way that hospitals quiet at night. The noise dropping but never disappearing, the overhead lights dimmed in the patient corridors, the ER still running at partial tempo with the overnight crew. Okafor's team had reorganized their positioning based on her input, which had moved 2 of them from visible corridor presence to positions that were less visible but substantially more effective from a coverage standpoint. She'd walked Okafor through the building's interior layout, using the maintenance map she'd memorized over 6 years of knowing where every supply access point, every service corridor, and every structural load point was. He'd listened without interrupting, made notes on a small pad, asked 2 clarifying questions, both sharp. She'd noticed that about him. He asked exactly as many questions as he needed, and none he didn't. At 9:30 p.m., Patel came back with a second agent Sera hadn't met, a lean man named Quirk, who moved quietly and said very little. They set up in the administrator's office on the 2nd floor and began working through whatever intelligence operation they were running in parallel to the immediate security situation. At 11:15 p.m., the patient in 412 had a blood pressure spike. Sera was notified by the monitoring alarm. She went in. The patient was a man in his mid-50s named, according to the medical file Patel had sent her, Howard Breslin. He was compact, gray-haired, with the papery skin of someone who'd spent significant time under institutional fluorescent lighting and not much recent time outdoors. He was awake when she came in, which she hadn't expected. His eyes tracked her with the sharpness of someone who is frightened but not panicking. "Blood pressure's running high," she said. She checked the monitor. 178/104. Not critical, but not comfortable. "When did you last eat?" "Lunch," he said. His voice was raspy. "They brought something at noon." "Any chest pain, shortness of breath?" "No." He watched her adjust his IV line. "Is the hospital secure?" "Yes." "That's not what I heard 6 hours ago." 6 hours ago, the situation was developing. It's contained now. She checked his pupils, his color, the quality of his breathing. He was anxious, dehydrated, and his medication had probably been disrupted by the transfer. All of it was manageable. "I'm going to adjust your medication dosage slightly and bring you some water. Your pressure should come down within the hour." "Are you going to stay on the floor tonight?" She looked at him. He was watching her with the intensity of someone who had learned, probably through unpleasant experience, to read the people responsible for keeping him alive. "Yes," she said. Something in his shoulders released. Not completely, but some. "The people outside," he said. "Not the federal agents. The others. What about them?" "They're not going to stop." He said it without drama, with the flat certainty of someone stating a known condition. "I've been in this process for 2 years. Every time they think I'm about to be too far along to stop, they try something. They're very patient, and they have resources." "I know," Sera said. He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You know more than you're saying." "I know enough for tonight." She made a note in his chart. "I'll have the water here in 5 minutes. Try to sleep if you can." She went back to the nurse's station, got his water, delivered it, and was back at the station by 11:40 p.m. At 11:52 p.m., a thing happened that she almost missed. She was reviewing the overnight patient list when she noticed a discrepancy in the visitor log. Harlan Cross ran a restricted visitor policy after 9 p.m. All after-hours access required a cleared badge or escort. The log showed an entry at 11:38 p.m. for a maintenance contractor. Routine HVAC work, according to the entry notation. She stared at it. HVAC maintenance at 11:38 p.m. on a Tuesday. She pulled up the facility's maintenance schedule on the station terminal. The last scheduled after-hours HVAC work had been 2 weeks ago. There was nothing on the schedule for tonight. She picked up the internal line and called Okafor's frequency through the hospital comms. "West Wing, this is Vance. Who cleared the maintenance contractor who came through at 11:38? A pause. Then a voice she recognized as Graves. "Say again?" "Visitor log shows a maintenance contractor granted access at 11:38. HVAC notation. Who authorized it?" Another pause. Longer. "Nobody on our end," Graves said. "Stand by." She was already moving. The HVAC access points in the facility ran along the ceiling service corridor, a narrow maintenance passage that ran the length of the building above the drop ceiling tiles. There were 4 primary access hatches. One of them was directly above the West Wing corridor, directly above room 412. She was moving fast now, not running. Running in a hospital at night pulled attention, and she needed attention on the contractor, not on her. She moved through the stairwell to the second floor, took the east maintenance access, and came out into the narrow service corridor that ran above the drop ceiling. The space was tight and poorly lit. She pulled her phone out and used the flashlight, moving carefully along the service walkway. The HVAC ducts ran in parallel lines on either side. She could hear the low hum of the system. She could also hear, faintly but unmistakably, a sound that wasn't the HVAC system. Movement. Ahead and slightly below her, toward the West Wing. She killed the phone light. In the dark, she moved by memory and by the structural geometry she'd absorbed over 6 years of knowing this building. 20 feet. 15. 10. She could hear breathing now, the kind of controlled breathing someone does when they're moving slowly and trying not to make noise. And then, through a thin gap in the service walkway where a joint had separated from an old structural shift, She saw a light below her, a small, focused light, a headlamp, narrow beam, and below it, the shape of a person working at something attached to the main HVAC duct. Not a contractor. Working too precisely. Working too fast. The movements had the efficiency of someone who had done this before and knew exactly what they were placing and where. She pulled back silently. She found her phone, dimmed the screen to minimum, and typed a message to Okafor's direct number rather than using voice. Service corridor above West Wing. One contact. Active. Not HVAC. Get someone to the second floor maintenance access east. Now do not come up the west access. She sent it. Then she put the phone away. In the dark above Harlan Cross Medical Center, Sera Vance waited and listened and counted the sounds of movement below her and understood with the cold clarity of someone who had been in enough situations like this to recognize them by shape that whoever had walked through the front of this building that afternoon hadn't been the primary operation. This was. And it had been in the building, working quietly for the last 14 minutes. The 14 minutes mattered because she counted them. Not obsessively. She wasn't the kind of person who catastrophized in the dark, but because knowing how long someone had been working inside a structure told you things. 14 minutes at a controlled pace in a confined ceiling space with a headlamp and a specific task meant the person below her had done reconnaissance on this building before tonight. They knew the access points, the duct layout, the distance from entry hatch to target position. This was not improvised. This had been planned in parallel to the afternoon operation, which meant the afternoon operation had never been about extracting the witness. It had been about drawing the security response, mapping it, identifying the gaps, and creating the window for the real entry. She'd seen this architecture before. In different terrain, different targets, the same logic. She stayed still in the dark and waited for Okafor's team. 40 seconds, a minute. The sound below her continued, careful, methodical, the small sounds of someone attaching something to a surface with deliberate care. She forced her breathing down. The left-hand tremor was gone. It always disappeared when the situation got serious enough, which she'd learned to find darkly funny about herself. A soft vibration in her palm. She angled the phone screen away from the gap and read the message. East access. 2 inbound. Hold. She held. The person below her stopped moving. Sera froze completely. In the sudden silence, the HVAC hum seemed louder. She could hear her own pulse. The person below had gone still, which meant they'd heard or sensed something, and now both of them were waiting in the dark for the other to move first, which was exactly the kind of situation where the person who moved second usually had the advantage, and also the person who moved second was the one whose hands were currently empty. She looked at what she had. Phone, pen light, pocketed. And 6 feet to her left, clipped to the service walkway railing, an emergency shutoff lever for the HVAC system's secondary circulation loop, a manual override installed during the building's last safety upgrade, bright red handle, designed to be found in the dark. She reached for it slowly. The person below moved again. Not working sounds. Different sounds. The sound of someone repositioning, coming up. She grabbed the lever and pulled it hard. The secondary circulation loop shut down with a mechanical thunk that resonated through the ductwork like a struck bell, and for 1 full second, the entire ceiling space changed its acoustic signature as the air pressure equalized. Below her, she heard a sharp intake of breath, and then movement. Fast, disoriented movement. The person below reacting to the sound and the sudden pressure change simultaneously. Sera moved toward the gap. She hit the phone light, aimed it down through the structural gap, and for 2 seconds, she had a clear visual on the person below. Male. Dark clothing. Headlamp displaced, hanging to one side. And on the duct beside him, 2 devices, small, black, positioned at junction points. Not explosive configurations. She could see that from here. Something else. Something electronic. Then the east access hatch opened, and Okafor's voice came through hard and fast, and the person below stopped being her problem. She stayed in the ceiling space while it resolved below her. She heard commands, heard resistance. Brief, not prolonged. Heard the specific sound of someone being physically restrained. Then Okafor's voice again, controlled, telling someone to stop moving, and then quiet. Vance? His voice came up through the gap. Clear. She moved back to the east access hatch and came down the ladder into the second-floor maintenance corridor. Okafor was there. The other operator, a woman she'd been introduced to as Tanner, had the intruder face down on the service walkway floor with his hands secured. He was breathing hard and bleeding from a cut above his ear where his headlamp had caught him during the takedown. He was not, she observed, looking at anyone. He was staring at the floor with the deliberate blankness of someone who had been trained to give nothing away once captured. Devices on the duct, she said to Okafor. 2 of them, East Junction and the secondary bypass. Not explosive. The profile's wrong. Electronic. Okafor turned to Tanner. Get Quirk up here. What are they for? Tanner asked. If they're where I think they are relative to the building systems. Sera was already working it through. The HVAC secondary loop feeds the air handling for the West Wing. If you put a device at those 2 junction points, you have a delivery pathway into the environmental system for that corridor. The silence that followed lasted about 2 seconds. A delivery pathway for what? Okafor said. It wasn't quite a question. That's what I need Quirk to tell us. She looked at the man on the floor. Or someone with more current intelligence on what this network uses for incapacitation. Okafor crouched beside the captured man. What's in the devices? Nothing. The man kept staring at the floor. I can get a lab analysis in, Okafor started. We don't have lab time, Sera said. If those devices are on a timer or a remote trigger, we could have minutes or we could have hours. We need to pull them and seal the HVAC access to the West Wing now, and we need to move Breslin out of 412. Moving him compromises the location integrity. Leaving him in 412 while someone potentially has a chemical delivery pathway into his ventilation is worse. He looked at her. She looked back. This was the thing about working with good operators. They didn't need long to make decisions once the logic was clear. Tanner, seal the duct access, he said. Don't touch the devices. Photo and contain. Vance, walk me through moving the witness. Bond. Moving Howard Breslin at midnight without alerting anyone monitoring the facility required a specific kind of logistics that were not complicated but required precision. Sera ran it while walking. He's on IV medication that I can bag for transport. Mobile. His pressure is still elevated, which means I'm not putting him on stairs. Service elevator only. The service elevator runs on a separate access card system from the main elevators and doesn't show on the lobby display. Where are we moving him? 3rd floor. There's a private recovery suite on the north end that's been vacant since last week. The suite was prepped for a surgical patient who got delayed. It has its own air handling unit disconnected from the main HVAC loop. The room doesn't appear on the main patient manifest because it hasn't been formally assigned. Okafor was quiet for half a beat. You know this building like a grid reference? I've worked it for 6 years. She pushed through the stairwell door to the West Wing. And I learned the things that matter. Breslin was awake when they came in. He read the room fast. Sera in scrubs, Okafor in tactical gear, both moving with purpose, and sat up without being asked. We're relocating you, Sera said. She was already disconnecting his monitoring leads in the sequence that minimized disruption to his readings. It's precautionary. You'll be on a portable monitor. Don't talk in the elevator. How bad is it? It's manageable. She pulled the IV bag from the stand and handed it to Okafor to carry. Sit on the edge of the bed for me. He did. She checked his legs. No edema. Good. He was going to be ambulatory. Can you walk at a normal pace for about 3 minutes? Yes. Good. She helped him stand, steadied him while he found his balance. He was slightly unsteady. The blood pressure medication on top of stress, on top of disrupted sleep. She kept a hand at his elbow, not holding him up, but there if he needed it. Stay close to me. They moved through the West Wing corridor into the service elevator, up 1 floor, out into the North Recovery corridor. 3 minutes and 40 seconds, door to door. She got him into the suite, onto the bed, leads reattached, IV rehung. She took his pressure again, 172/98, still high but no worse. He looked around the room. Does the other nurse know where I am? Not yet. The fewer people who know your location, the better tonight. He nodded. His hands were clasped in his lap, and she noticed they were steady, which told her something about him. "The thing they put in the ductwork," he said. "That was meant for me." "We don't know that yet." "I do." He said it without self-pity, just flatly, as a person states a thing they've accepted. "This is the third time in 11 months. She looked at him. "Third time they've tried something like this?" "Third time I've been in a room and something that wasn't supposed to be there was in it." He looked at the window, which looked out on the north parking structure, and beyond it, the dark mountain line. "The first time, everyone told me I was being paranoid. A marshal's deputy, actually, very politely explained that I was experiencing elevated anxiety due to the stress of the witness protection process. A small, humorless sound that was almost a laugh. I filed a formal complaint. It went nowhere." "What happened after the first time?" "I asked for a different deputy." He paused. "They gave me a different deputy and a note in my file about witness compliance issues. She wrote that down internally, not on paper, in the part of her mind that filed operational information, a deputy who dismissed a legitimate threat report and then generated a negative file notation about the witness who'd made the complaint. That was either incompetence or something worse, and she was starting to think she knew which one. "Try to sleep," she said. "I'll be back in an hour." "You won't sleep?" "Not tonight." He looked at her with the same expression he'd had earlier, the particular attention of someone recalibrating who exactly they were talking to. "Who are you?" he said. Not aggressively, genuinely. "Sera Vance, nurse." He held her gaze for a moment. "You're more than that." "Tonight I'm the person keeping you safe," she said. "That's enough." At 1:20 a.m., Quirk came back from the ceiling space with photographs of the devices and his face composed in the careful neutrality of someone who has seen something that warrants a careful response. They gathered in the second-floor administrator's office. Sera, Okafor, Patel, Quirk, and Tanner, who had sealed the duct access and was standing against the wall with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. Quirk laid his phone on the table with the photos pulled up. "Aerosol delivery system," he said. "Small volume, pharmaceutical-grade canister in a thermal shell. The electronic component is a remote trigger receiver. It waits for a specific RF signal on a frequency that wouldn't register as suspicious on a standard sweep." "What's in the canister?" Patel said. "We won't know until the lab runs it, but the delivery configuration, low volume, targeted to a specific air handling section, timer backup with remote primary, is consistent with incapacitation agents we've seen this network use before." Patel was quiet. Sera looked at her. "You've seen this before from these people." "Once, 14 months ago. Different city, different witness." Patel picked up Quirk's phone and looked at the photograph. "That witness didn't make it." The room was very still. "The leak in your chain," Sera said. "It's not just information about transfer locations. Someone is passing operational details, facility layouts, building systems. This required someone with access to Harlan Cross's HVAC schematics." Patel put the phone down. "That's not public information." "No," Sera said. "It's in the facility management system, which is accessible to hospital administration, facilities contractors, and—" She stopped. Everyone looked at her. "The maintenance contractor entry in the visitor log tonight," she said. "It was cleared. Someone authorized that entry in the system. That authorization would have required an administrative access code." Okafor straightened. "You're saying the person who cleared the contractor is someone who has hospital administrative access," Sera said, "and either made a mistake or is the leak or is being used by someone who accessed their credentials." Patel was already on her phone. "I need the full access log for Harlan Cross's facility management system for the last 72 hours, she said. "Yes, now. I need to know every login and every authorization, and I need it in 20 minutes. She paused. "Wake them up." Sera stood. "While you work that, I need to do patient rounds." Okafor looked at her. "You've been on shift for—" he checked. 11 hours. "I'm aware." She picked up her clipboard from the table. "Rounds. She was at the door when Patel said her name. She stopped. "The deputy," Patel said. "The one who dismissed Breslin's first threat report. Can you tell me what Breslin told you about that?" Sera recounted it in 3 sentences. The dismissal, the file notation, the reassignment. Patel wrote something down. Her face was doing something careful and controlled that Sera recognized as the expression of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion they'd been carrying for a long time and wasn't yet ready to let it show. "Thank you," Patel said. Sera went to do her rounds. At 2:45 a.m., the facility management access log came back, and it broke the case open in a direction nobody had fully anticipated. Sera was at the 3rd floor nurses' station, updating Breslin's chart, when Okafor appeared in the corridor and told her to come back to the administrator's office. His voice had the quality of someone carrying information they haven't fully processed yet. In the office, Patel had the log pulled up on a laptop. Quirk was standing behind her. Both of them looked like people who had been running hard in one direction and had just discovered the road bent somewhere they hadn't mapped. "The administrative access that cleared the contractor tonight," Patel said. "The credential ID traces to a user account in the hospital facilities system. The account belongs to the facilities coordinator for Harlan Cross." She turned the laptop so Sera could see the screen. "But the login was made from an IP address that's not in this building." Sera looked at the screen. The IP trace, the timestamp, the credential ID. "Remote access," she said. "Someone used the facilities coordinator's credentials from a remote location to log into the hospital system and manually authorize a contractor entry." Patel's voice was flat. "The facilities coordinator has been on leave for the past 10 days, personal medical leave. He's not in the building, he hasn't been in the building, and according to his wife, he's been in the hospital himself, different facility, 2 hours north, for a cardiac procedure." The silence in the room had weight. "His credentials were compromised," Okafor said. "Or borrowed," Quirk said. "Or taken from someone who had access to them." Sera was thinking. "The facility management system. Who has the authority to issue access credentials to that system?" Patel looked at her. "It's not a federal system," Sera said. "It's a hospital administrative system, which means whoever issued or managed the facilities coordinator's credentials is someone in hospital administration. Or someone who had access to hospital administration systems," Patel said carefully. "Who in this hospital," Sera said, and she heard her own voice come out more even than she expected, "has been in contact with anyone connected to the people who came through our front doors this afternoon?" Nobody answered immediately, which wasn't because nobody had a theory. It was because the theory, once stated, was going to change what happened next in ways that couldn't be undone. Patel closed the laptop. "I need you to think carefully. In the last 72 hours, anyone behaving unusually, anyone asking questions about the West Wing, about security positioning, about the patient in 412. Sera thought about the last 72 hours. She thought about Terrence Woolley telling her the West Wing was restricted without telling her why. She thought about the response time on her liaison flags. 3 formal medical concerns, all receiving form responses within minutes, which wasn't how the liaison system usually ran. She thought about the maintenance cart that Graves had moved without being asked, and who had told him the corridor was clear for equipment staging. She thought about one more thing. At 6:55 a.m. on Monday, 2 days ago, she had come in for an early shift and found Woolley in the administrative system on the main desk terminal. He'd closed the screen when she approached, which she'd noted and filed and not thought about again until this moment. She told Patel. The room went very quiet. "Woolley," Okafor said, "your floor supervisor." "He has administrative credentials for the hospital system," Sera said. "Scheduling, staffing, facility access. It's standard for his role." She was being precise because precision mattered. "That doesn't mean he used them for this. It means he has access that could have been used." "Or his credentials were also compromised," Quirk offered. "Possibly." Sera looked at Patel. "But you need to look at him." "I intend to." Patel stood. In the meantime, the door opened. It was Tanner. Her face had the particular quality of someone who has just absorbed bad information and is managing the transmission of it. "We have a problem on the east stairwell," she said. "The captured contractor from the ceiling space. He's conscious and he's asking to talk." She paused. He's asking specifically to talk to the nurse. He says he has information about a second device. The room processed that in less than 2 seconds. Second device, Okafor said. He wouldn't say where. He says he'll only tell her. Tanner looked at Sera. He gave a physical description. It's accurate. Sera looked at Patel. Patel looked at Okafor. The look that passed between them contained a full conversation about protocol, risk assessment, and the specific calculus of a situation where the person with the information was setting the terms. If there's a second device and he has its location, Sera said, the time we spend deciding whether to send me in is time the device is running. Patel said, we'll be right outside the door. I know, Sera said, and she was already moving. The east stairwell holding area was a landing between floors where Tanner's team had the contractor secured to a support rail. He was sitting with his back against the wall, hands behind him, the headlamp cut finally staunched with a field dressing someone had applied. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, dark eyes with the particular flatness that came from either exceptional training or exceptional damage, and she couldn't tell yet which one it was. He looked up when she came in. You were in the ceiling, he said. Yes. You pulled the emergency override. Yes. He looked at her for a moment. You're not security. No. But you're not just a nurse either. She didn't answer that. She crouched to his eye level, which was a choice about power dynamic that she made deliberately. You said there's a second device. He looked at her with something that wasn't quite calculation and wasn't quite desperation. It was the look of someone who had reached a decision point and was checking the person across from them to see if the decision was worth making. If I tell you, he said, it doesn't matter for me. You understand that. My people will know I talked. I understand. I want that on record, that I told you. I'll make sure it's documented. He held her gaze for another 2 seconds. Then he said, it's not in the building. She went very still. The second device isn't in the building, he said. It's in the vehicle. The transport vehicle they're going to use to move the witness when they evacuate him. It's already in place. He paused. The plan was never to take him out through the ceiling. The aerosol was for the medical staff. Put everyone in the West Wing down. In the chaos, the federal team moves the witness to what they think is a secure transport. The vehicle is already compromised. Sera stood up slowly. The transport vehicle. Patel's team would call for an evacuation if the facility was deemed compromised. A secure transport would be prearranged through official channels. The same official channels that had already demonstrated a leak somewhere in the authorization chain. She turned toward the door. Nurse, the man said behind her. She stopped. The person who arranged the vehicle, he said. They're in this building right now. She pushed through the stairwell door and moved fast, and behind her the door swung shut on whatever the man said next, because she didn't need to hear the name. She already knew who was in this building. She already knew who had closed the screen when she walked up behind him 2 days ago. And she was already running the math on how long it would take Terrence Woolley, who had been carrying a personal cell phone since shift change, and whose access credentials had cleared a phantom contractor into the building at 11:38 p.m., to make a phone call from the administrative office on the ground floor before Patel's team got to him. She hit the stairwell at a run. The ground floor administrative corridor was 60 feet from the base of the stairwell. Sera covered it in under 20 seconds. She wasn't thinking about what she'd say when she got there. She was thinking about the cell phone. Woolley had been carrying it since she'd noticed it at shift change, tucked into his left breast pocket, which wasn't where he normally kept it. Small thing. The kind of detail that registers and gets filed without being analyzed because there are always small details and most of them mean nothing. This one meant something. If he made a call, the transport vehicle operation either accelerated or aborted. Either outcome was bad. Acceleration meant Patel's team would receive a compromised evacuation order before anyone could intercept it. Abort meant the network pulled back, destroyed whatever evidence trail existed, and rebuilt from a position where they now knew the extent of the federal team's awareness. She needed to reach Woolley before he made the call. She came through the stairwell door into the ground floor corridor and turned left and almost immediately saw him. He was 30 feet away, standing near the administrative office doorway with his back to her, right hand at his ear. Not a phone call yet. She could see from his posture that he was listening to something, earpiece maybe, or running through what he was going to say. His left hand was flat against the wall beside the doorframe, the posture of someone bracing. She kept her footsteps even and her pace the same. Running would alert him. The corridor was mostly empty at this hour. One overnight aide visible at the far end, not looking their direction. 20 feet. 15. He turned. She watched his face run through 3 distinct phases in about half a second. Recognition, surprise, and then a very fast recalibration towards something that tried to look like normalcy and didn't quite get there. His right hand dropped from his ear and went into his pocket. Vance. His voice was steady. She'd give him that. You're still here. Long shift. She stopped 6 feet from him, kept her body language loose, clipboard in her left hand, which was deliberate. The clipboard made her look like she was doing rounds, not looking for him specifically. Administrative office is supposed to be locked after midnight. I needed to check a scheduling issue. Overnight staff request. His eyes moved once, quickly, to the corridor behind her, checking whether she was alone. He would have noticed she was. He would be deciding right now whether that was good or bad for him. At 3 a.m., she said, the request came in at 2:30. He smiled, and the smile had the particular quality of something constructed rather than felt. You know how it is. She looked at him for a moment, not long enough to be confrontational, just long enough to let him know she was looking. I need the coverage schedule for the 3rd floor for the rest of this week, she said. I've got a patient situation that's going to need consistent nursing contact, and I want to make sure we don't have gaps. I can pull that in the morning. I need it now. She held his gaze with the same calm she'd used with 1,000 difficult patients, difficult families, difficult situations. The calm that came not from being unafraid, but from having decided that the fear was not the priority. 5 minutes. Something moved across his face that he controlled quickly. The calculation was visible even through the control. She was alone, she was a nurse, she was making a routine administrative request at an inconvenient hour. If he refused, it was suspicious. If he engaged, he was stationary for 5 minutes, while whatever he was planning had a 5-minute window closed. He pushed the office door open. Come in. She sent the text to Okafor's number as she followed him through the door, phone angled below the clipboard, thumb moving by memory on the screen. Admin office ground floor, Woolley. Come now. She put the phone in her pocket. The administrative office had 4 workstations, 2 filing cabinets, and a window that looked into the hospital's interior courtyard. The overhead light was already on, which meant he'd been in here before she arrived. On the nearest workstation, the screen was active. She could see from her angle that a browser window was open, minimized but present, and the facility management system was logged in. He sat down at the workstation and pulled up the scheduling system. His movements were controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the particular rigidity of someone maintaining performance under pressure. He'd been doing this a long time, she thought, not the hospital administration. The other thing, the performance of being ordinary while being something else. It had a specific quality she recognized because she'd maintained a version of it herself for 6 years, and she knew how much energy it required and what the edges of it looked like when it was being stressed. 3rd floor, full week, he said, pulling up the schedule. What's the patient situation? Post-cardiac event. Monitoring needs to be consistent. She moved to stand slightly behind him and to the left, which put her near the door and gave her a line of sight to both the screen and the corridor window. Breslin in 412 is also going to need, she said the room number deliberately, watched his neck, a small tension, there and gone, but there. 412 is restricted, he said. His voice stayed level. I don't have medical management authority over that patient. I know, I'm just flagging it for corridor coverage. If the federal team needs nursing support on that wing, I want someone assigned who knows the West Wing layout. She leaned slightly toward the screen, appearing to look at the schedule. Can you pull up the wing assignment matrix? He navigated to a second screen. His right hand, she noticed, kept moving toward his left breast pocket, and then pulling back. The phone. He wanted to make the call and she was preventing it, and he was deciding how long he could maintain this before the calculation changed. The corridor window showed movement. Okafor outside. And behind him, Patel. She needed 30 more seconds. The overnight coverage on the third floor north, she said. Who's covering the 6 a.m. handover? Delacroix, I think. He was pulling up a second screen, navigating with the efficiency of someone who'd done this task 1,000 times. Let me check. Take your time, she said. The door opened. Woolley turned, and when he saw Okafor, he went still in the complete way that people go still when what they've been bracing for finally arrives. Not shocked. He'd been half expecting it since the corridor. But the moment of transition from managing a situation to being inside a situation that had already decided itself had its own quality, and it showed on his face for the 2 full seconds before he put something else over it. Mr. Woolley, Patel said from the doorway. She had her badge out. Behind her, Quirk was moving to the workstation to take over the screen. I need you to step away from the keyboard and put your hands where I can see them. He looked at Patel, then at Sera. You came in here for a schedule request, he said. Yes, Sera said. His jaw tightened. You knew. She didn't answer that. She moved toward the door out of the way of Patel's team because her part in this room was finished, and she knew it. Vance. His voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was underneath it wasn't anger. It was something more complicated and, in a different context, more pitiable. The look of someone who had committed to a position a long time ago and had been living in the gap between what they'd told themselves about it and what it actually was, and who was now, at 3:18 in the morning in a hospital administrative office, finally out of room to maintain that gap. I was going to lose everything. The pension, it wasn't supposed to go this far. It never is, she said, and she walked out. What? The next 4 hours were federal hours, which meant they moved at a different speed than hospital hours. Patel's team processed the administrative office. Quirk extracted the facility management access logs, the browser history, the credential usage record going back 60 days. What they found was, as Patel described it to Sera at 5 a.m. over terrible coffee in the second-floor break room, worse than anticipated, and also, in the way that confirmed suspicions always were, exactly as bad as the evidence had suggested. Woolley had been providing facility access intelligence to the network for 4 months. Not because he was an ideological actor, there was nothing political in it, nothing principled in any direction. He had a gambling debt of a kind and magnitude that had narrowed his options to the point where someone had offered him a solution, and he had taken it, and then the taking of it had required further taking, and by the time the afternoon attack on Harlan Cross happened, he had been so far inside the arrangement that the original debt seemed almost abstract. He had provided building schematics, HVAC system documentation, staff scheduling details, and critically, the details of the federal witness transfer. Not the specifics, which he didn't have direct access to, but the flag in the hospital system that indicated a defense patient placement on the West Wing, which had been enough for someone with the right context to fill in the rest. The deputy who had dismissed Breslin's first threat report 14 months ago was a separate thread that Patel was already pulling, with a different team, in a different city. Sera sat with the coffee and listened to Patel walk through it, and felt the particular exhaustion of having been right about something in a situation where being right didn't feel like a victory. The transport vehicle, she said. Impounded at 4:40 a.m., Patel said. Device found in the rear cargo area. Remote trigger receiver, same RF signature as the ceiling units. If we'd moved Breslin via official evacuation channels, she stopped. I know, Sera said. The warrant for Woolley's arrest is being processed. He'll be formally charged by 8 a.m. Patel drank her coffee. Federal charges, obstruction, conspiracy, material support. The weight of it's going to take a long time to calculate, but none of the options are short. Outside the break room window, the sky was doing the thing it did in Delbrook in the winter, going from black to gray to a pale, undifferentiated light that wasn't quite dawn but was the direction of it. The parking structure was visible below them, half empty at this hour, the wet asphalt reflecting the light in the way wet asphalt did. Breslin, Sera said. Stable. Pressure came down overnight. He'll be moved to a new facility at a time, and through a channel that's being arranged without using any of the compromised infrastructure. Patel paused. He asked about you, whether you'd be briefed on the outcome. You can tell him yes. He said, Patel stopped, seemed to be deciding whether to relay it. He said the nurse was the first person in 11 months who believed him without needing to be persuaded. Sera looked at the window. She thought about the deputy who had noted witness compliance issues in a file because a frightened man in a difficult situation had insisted something was wrong and nobody wanted to deal with it. She thought about the administrative efficiency of a form response system that processed 3 legitimate medical concerns in 12 minutes without anyone actually reading them. She thought about the easy, weightless quality of dismissal, how little effort it took, how much it cost the person on the receiving end. "Tell him I'm glad he's okay," she said. She finished the coffee, stood up, and went back to her floor. Mont. By 7 a.m., the day shift was coming on. The ER was running at morning tempo. The particular controlled acceleration of a hospital floor transitioning between overnight stillness and daytime volume, staff arriving with coffee cups and dry-cleaned scrubs, the board filling with the day's first cases, the overnight crew doing handover briefings with the focused brevity of people who needed to get home. Sera completed her handover documentation at the main nurses' station. It was thorough. It was always thorough. But it was also longer than usual because it had to account for a patient relocation, a modified monitoring protocol, a facility security situation and its resolution, and the administrative changes to corridor access that Patel's team had implemented overnight. She wrote it in the same even clinical prose she always used. Facts, observations, actions taken, outcomes. She was almost done when Dr. Annalie Marsh appeared at the station. Marsh was Harlan Cross's chief of emergency medicine. She was in her mid-50s, with the weathered precision of someone who had been practicing emergency medicine for long enough that nothing surprised her and almost nothing impressed her. She and Sera had worked the same department for 4 years with the collegial respect of professionals who were good at their jobs and had no particular need to perform that for each other. Marsh didn't supervise Sera directly. She supervised the department. The distinction had never come up before today. She stood at the station and looked at Sera's documentation for a moment. "I was briefed at 6 a.m., she said, by the federal agent, Patel. I figured you would be. She told me the primary decisions last night ran through you. The patient relocation, the device identification, the stairwell situation." Marsh paused. She said Okafor's assessment was that without your intervention, the second phase operation would have succeeded. "Okafor's team did the hard work," Sera said. "I provided building knowledge and clinical support." Marsh looked at her with the expression of someone who has just been handed a sentence that is technically accurate and substantively insufficient. "The building knowledge, the RF assessment, the tactical prediction on the flanking movement this afternoon." She kept her voice level. "Sera, what exactly was your background before nursing school?" Sera finished her documentation, dated it, signed it. "It's in my HR file," she said. "Army Medical. I listed it when I applied. I read the listing. I also read what Patel gave me access to this morning." Marsh was quiet for a moment. "You've been working in my department for 4 years. You never said anything. You never asked about the specifics." "No." Marsh leaned against the station counter. "I suppose I didn't." She was quiet again, and in the quiet there was something that wasn't quite an apology. Marsh wasn't the apologizing type, but was a close relative of one. "You should go home. You've been on since yesterday afternoon. I'll finish handover first." "Of course you will." Marsh looked at her for another moment. "You put in a request 6 months ago for updated monitoring equipment in Bay 4. I tabled it because of the budget cycle." "I remember." "I'm approving it today." She straightened. "And I'm recommending you for the senior clinical coordinator position that opens in March. You can tell me whether you want it later, after you've slept." She walked away without waiting for a response, which was exactly how Marsh handled everything. And Sera watched her go and felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief, but was in the neighborhood of both. The specific sensation of being seen clearly, accurately, by someone whose assessment actually meant something, after a very long time of not being seen at all. She filed the documentation, completed the handover, and was pulling on her jacket at the staff exit when Okafor found her. He looked like a man who had not slept, which was accurate, and who had spent the hours since 4 a.m. dealing with the kind of institutional aftermath that involved multiple phone calls to multiple agencies about a situation that multiple people would have preferred had gone differently in multiple small ways. He looked like he'd been in that process and was still partly in it. 5 minutes, he said. I'm 5 minutes from my car. Walk with me. They walked toward the exit together. The corridor was doing its morning thing, busy, bright, the institutional rhythm of a working day beginning. Wallace is being transferred for surgery this morning, he said. Shoulder repair. He'll be out for 12 weeks. He was quiet for a few steps. He asked me to pass something along. What? He said, and I'm quoting him directly, because Wallace is not a man who edits himself. He said, tell the nurse she was better than anyone we brought in, and I've worked with good people. Sera kept walking. Graves said something similar, Okafor said, with fewer words. Tell them both I said thank you. They reached the staff exit. He held the door. Outside, the morning was gray and cold, and the mountains were visible for once through a break in the cloud cover, sharp-edged against the pale sky. Patel's putting together a formal incident report, he said. Your contribution is going to be documented specifically, not as hospital staff support, as a primary operational contributor. That's going to generate questions about my file. Yes. He looked at her. I know you've had reasons to keep a low profile. I'm not asking you to change that, but the documentation will be accurate. She thought about that. 6 years of building a quiet life in a building that smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee, under fluorescent lights that buzzed in the winter, doing work that mattered without anyone knowing the full dimensions of why she was good at it. She had made that choice deliberately, and she still believed in it, but she also believed in accuracy. Fine, she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. If you ever want to come back, he said. Formally. There are roles. I have a role, she said. I'm going home to sleep. He almost smiled. Fair enough. She walked to her car. The morning air was cold and damp and smelled like pine and exhaust. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, not thinking about anything specific, just letting the silence be what it was. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, which meant it was routed through something official. She opened it. Ms. Vance, Howard Breslin. They told me you authorized sharing your contact. I wanted to say thank you. I also wanted to say that the people who arranged this operation, the network, not the men you caught last night, have been building this case against me for 2 years. I've given federal prosecutors everything I have. But there's one piece I never got to deliver, because every time I got close to a secure channel, something happened. I have documentation of a transaction that identifies the primary financial organizer of the network. I tried to pass it through the marshal's chain twice. Both times the transmission was intercepted. I don't know who to trust in that chain anymore. She stared at the message. The only person in the last 11 months who acted without being told to, who made decisions that weren't on any official script, and who I watched stay completely functional in a situation designed to create chaos, is you. I know this isn't your job. I know you've already done more than anyone asked, but if you're willing, I need someone outside the compromise chain to receive this documentation and get it to the right place. The file is 12 pages. It names a sitting federal official. She sat in the car with the phone in her hand and the engine off and the morning light coming through the windshield gray and cold, and read the message again. A sitting federal official, which meant the network's reach didn't stop at a hospital floor supervisor with a gambling debt. It didn't stop at a deputy who dismissed a witness report and flagged his file. It ran higher than that, and Breslin had known it for 11 months, and every time he'd tried to move the information through official infrastructure, the information had been stopped by someone with access to that infrastructure. Someone with considerably more access than Terrence Woolley. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "Send me the file." She started the engine. And in the gray morning light of a parking structure in Delbrook, with the mountains sharp through the cloud break and the hospital she'd worked in for 6 years at her back, Sera Vance pulled out of the parking space and drove, not toward home, as she'd told Okafor, but toward a copy shop on 4th Street that opened at 7 a.m. and had a secure fax line she'd used once before, 3 years ago, for something she'd told herself at the time was the last time. The file was already downloading to her phone. It was 12 pages. And on page 3, according to the preview line she could see without opening the document fully, was a name she recognized. Not from the hospital, not from Delbrook, from a briefing she'd attended 8 years ago in a building that didn't have a public address, where a man in civilian clothes had outlined the financial infrastructure supporting a network of defense contractor fraud that had been, at the time, assessed as a medium priority concern not yet worth full federal resources. The man who had run that briefing had told the assembled personnel that the primary financial organizer was a ghost. No face, no direct connection to any transaction, no paper trail that held up past 2 degrees of separation. Apparently Howard Breslin had found the paper trail. And apparently the primary financial organizer was not, as everyone had assumed for 8 years, a ghost. He had a name, a title, and an office in a building with a very specific address that Sera Vance knew because she had walked past it every day for the first 2 years of her military career. She pressed the accelerator and drove through the gray Delbrook morning, and behind her Harlan Cross Medical Center disappeared in the rear-view mirror, and ahead of her the 4th Street copy shop's light was on, and in her phone the file kept downloading page by page into a situation that was larger and older and more dangerous than anything that had happened last night. And Sera Vance, who had walked away from all of this 8 years ago, who had built a quiet life and a useful practice and 6 years of early shifts and patient rounds and medication carts and 17-year-olds with dislocated shoulders, drove toward it anyway, because the patient in the room needed help. That had always been the only reason she needed. The copy shop on 4th Street was called Dalton's, and it had been there since before Sera moved to Delbrook, which meant it had been there through 3 recessions and the shift from film to digital, and the particular slow decline of anything that required people to leave their houses and touch physical equipment. It survived because it served the people who needed things done that couldn't be done on a home printer. Legal documents, architectural plans, things that needed to be sent through a machine with a paper trail that meant something in a courtroom. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain, and the unhurried competence of someone who had been doing the same job well for a very long time. Her name tag said Ruth. "Secure fax," Sera said. "Line 3, if it's available." Ruth looked at her over the glasses. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. Is line 3 open?" "It's open." Ruth pulled a key from beneath the counter. 20 minutes? Should be less. She took the key, went to the private booth at the back of the shop, and sat down. The fax machine was old and reliable in the way that old reliable things are, not because nothing had ever gone wrong with it, but because the things that had gone wrong had been fixed and the machine had kept going. She opened Breslin's file on her phone. 12 pages. She read all of them before she did anything else. It took 9 minutes. She read carefully, the way she'd been trained to read intelligence documents, not looking for the dramatic moments, which tended to be distractions, but tracking the logic, the documentation chain, the points where evidence converged, and the points where it still needed support. The file was not perfect. 2 of the transaction records had gaps in the chain of custody that a competent defense attorney would attack immediately. One of the witness identifications relied on a secondary source that was itself unverified, but the core of it held. 11 financial transactions routed through 3 shell entities incorporated in 2 different jurisdictions, each one individually explainable and collectively forming a pattern that was not explainable as anything other than what it was. And at the origination point of the first transaction, a name attached to a personal account number, Deputy Assistant Secretary Harlan Vret, Defense Acquisition Oversight, 14 years in the position. The man who had sat at the head of the table in a classified briefing room 8 years ago and told a group of military personnel that the financial organizer behind a defense contractor fraud network was a ghost. He'd been right. The ghost had been very well hidden. The ghost had been him. She sat with that for a moment. Not with surprise. The surprise had been in the car, reading the preview line, and she'd had 9 minutes of detailed financial documentation to convert the surprise into something colder and more functional. She sat with the weight of it, 14 years. The scope of what that meant, the contracts influenced, the oversight corrupted, the money moved, and the specific personal calculus of a man who had spent 14 years in a position designed to prevent exactly what he was doing, using the position to do it more effectively. Howard Breslin had found this. A mid-level contracts analyst with no special training, no military background, no intelligence resources, just someone doing his job carefully enough and long enough to notice that certain numbers didn't add up, and then being stubborn enough, and frightened enough, and principled enough in some basic, inarticulate way to keep pulling the thread even when it had cost him his career, his safety, and 11 months of his life in witness protection. She faxed the file to 3 numbers. The first was a direct line she had memorized years ago and never used. An inspector general's office contact she'd been given during her last year of service as a routine resource, the kind of number you wrote down and hoped you'd never need. The second was Patel's direct federal line, which Patel had given her on a card that morning. The third was a number she'd had for 8 years in a different context, belonging to a journalist who covered defense contracting for a national outlet and who had, the last time she'd checked, a reputation for exactness and a demonstrated tolerance for complicated sources. She sent each fax with a cover sheet that contained her name, her contact number, a brief factual summary of the document's provenance, and a single line at the bottom that said, "This file has been sent to multiple recipients simultaneously. Its contents are no longer containable through a single channel." That last line was the most important one. It meant that suppressing one recipient didn't suppress the file. It meant that anyone inclined to make this disappear had already lost the ability to make it disappear. The file existed now in multiple places with multiple people, and the only remaining question was how quickly it moved and in which direction. She gave Ruth back the key, paid in cash, and walked out into the cold morning. In her car, she sat for 30 seconds. Then she called Patel. Patel picked up on the second ring, which meant she hadn't slept either. "Vance, check your fax. Secure line. It came through in the last 5 minutes." A pause. The sound of movement, a door, someone being asked to step aside. Then, "What am I looking at?" "Breslin's documentation, the financial transaction record he's been trying to move for 11 months. Another pause. Longer. She could hear Patel reading, or beginning to read, and she recognized the silence of someone whose understanding of a situation was expanding rapidly in a direction they hadn't expected. "Vret," Patel said. "Page 3. "I see it." Her voice had gone very still. The particular stillness of a professional who has just found the thing that changes everything and is managing her response to it. Who else has this? The IG office and a journalist. The journalist has instructions not to publish for 48 hours, which gives your office time to move first if you choose to. And she'd included that instruction in the cover sheet, but if your office doesn't move in 48 hours, it goes to print. You sent it to a journalist. I sent it to 3 recipients simultaneously, which is the only reason this file is still viable. You know as well as I do what happened to it every time it moved through a single channel. Patel was quiet for a moment. That's not exactly protocol. No, Sera said. It's not. Another silence. Then, 48 hours. 48 hours. She hung up. She drove home. She showered, ate something she couldn't taste, and slept for 6 hours with her phone on the nightstand. Chas, the 48 hours did not feel like 48 hours. The first sign that things were moving came at 4 p.m. on the same day, when Patel sent a text that contained 3 words, "Asset is moving," which meant Breslin was being relocated through a channel that Patel now controlled personally, bypassing the compromised Marshall's infrastructure entirely. Sera sent back a single word, "Good." The second sign came the following morning, 18 hours in. A news alert on her phone, a defense publication, not the journalist she'd contacted, which meant the IG's office had moved faster than expected, and the story had developed legs before it was contained. The alert said, Deputy Assistant Secretary Harlan Vret placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. The language was careful. Administrative leave was not an indictment, but administrative leave in this context, announced at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday by a department that usually announced nothing, meant that someone with authority had looked at page 3 of the file and made a fast decision about proximity. The third sign came at hour 31, and it was not a text or a news alert. It was Okafor, at her door, in civilian clothes, holding 2 cups of coffee that were better than the hospital coffee, and looking like a man who had slept maybe 4 hours in the last 3 days and had made peace with it. She let him in. "You could have told me," he said. He wasn't angry. He was working through something. "I didn't know what was in the file until I read it." She took the coffee. "And by the time I read it, the fastest move was the one I made. The journalist. The journalist was the mechanism that made the file unstoppable." She sat down at the kitchen table. He sat across from her. "If I'd given it only to Patel, it would have gone up through official channels where Vret had 14 years of relationships and institutional leverage. The journalist created a hard deadline that official channels couldn't negotiate around." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. She'd noticed he did that when he was processing. "It worked," he said. "So far. Vret's people are already moving to characterize the documentation as fabricated. His attorneys sent a statement at 9 a.m. He looked at her over the cup. "The transaction records, the chain of custody gaps." "I know. I noted them when I read the file." She'd been thinking about this for 30 hours. "But there are 11 transactions. The 2 with chain of custody issues are the 4th and 7th. Transactions 1 through 3 and 5 through 6 have clean documentation. If prosecutors build from the clean records outward, the gaps become less critical because the pattern is already established by the time you reach them." Okafor looked at her for a moment. "You read a 12-page financial intelligence document once at 7 a.m. after being awake for over 20 hours, and you mapped the evidentiary vulnerabilities." "I read slowly," she said. He made a sound that was the closest she'd heard him come to a laugh. "The IG's office has 3 forensic accountants on it as of this morning. Patel briefed me an hour ago." He set the cup down. "They think the clean documentation is enough to issue a formal subpoena by end of week." She nodded, drank her coffee. "Woolley made a statement," he said, "this morning. His attorney arranged it through the federal public defender's office. He's corroborating several of the transaction points from the other direction. The facility access he provided, the contacts he was given, the specific instructions about the transport vehicle. He's not getting leniency, but his statement fills in gaps." "That's more than I expected from him." "People surprise you." He said it without irony, which meant he meant it, sometimes in that direction. She thought about Terrence Woolley sitting in the administrative office at 3 a.m., watching her walk out, saying I was going to lose everything with the particular bleakness of someone who had finally arrived at the thing they'd been running from. She didn't forgive him. The word felt imprecise for what she actually thought about it, but she understood the architecture of how a person ended up there. The original problem that seemed manageable, the solution that made it worse, the accumulated weight of each subsequent decision until the person making the decisions no longer resembled the person who had made the first one. Understanding it didn't make it less damaging, it just made it human. "How's Wallace?" she said. "Out of surgery. Shoulder repair went clean. He'll be on desk assignment for 3 months and he's already complaining about it, which means he's fine." Okafor paused. "He sent you something. It came through the unit." He reached into his jacket pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then picked it up. It was handwritten. Wallace's handwriting was the handwriting of someone who had learned to write in conditions that didn't favor penmanship. Blocky, slightly uneven, entirely legible. It said, "I've been in this work for 11 years. I've met 2 people who were better in a crisis than anyone their background suggested. You're one of them. The other one saved my life in a different building in a different country, so I know the category. Wallace." She folded the paper back up and set it on the table. She didn't say anything for a moment. Not because she was composing herself, she was fine, but because the note had a specific gravity to it that she wanted to acknowledge without performing. "Tell him thank you," she said. "When he's up to visitors." No. The formal charges against Harlan Vret were filed 39 hours after she sent the fax, which was 1 hour before the journalist's 48-hour window would have closed. She found out through a news alert, sitting in the hospital break room during a shift that had started as ordinary and remained ordinary in the way that good shifts were ordinary. Difficult in the particular ways that emergency medicine was always difficult, manageable, productive. The kind of day where you went home tired and felt like the tiredness had been earned for the right reasons. The alert read, Federal prosecutors file charges against Deputy Assistant Secretary Harlan Vrett on counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and financial crimes related to defense contractor fraud. The charges stem from a multi-year investigation that federal sources say was significantly advanced by documentation provided through a confidential channel outside the compromised official chain. She looked at the alert for a long moment. 14 years. The number kept coming back to her. 14 years of a man in a position of public trust using that position as a mechanism for its own corruption. 14 years of contracts influenced, oversight bypassed, money moved. And across those 14 years, on the other side of the ledger, Howard Breslin, doing his job carefully, noticing the numbers that didn't add up, refusing to let it go even when every official mechanism available to him had either failed him or been used against him. The system had failed Breslin in almost every specific way a system could fail a person. The deputy who dismissed his first report, the file notation about compliance issues, the intercepted transmission attempts, the attack on the facility, and also, Sera had found Patel credible and trustworthy within 20 minutes of meeting her, and Patel had moved the evidence in 39 hours. Systems failed and systems worked, sometimes in the same 48 hours. And the variable wasn't usually the system itself. It was whether the right people inside it were paying attention. She pocketed her phone and went back to the floor. Mints. 3 weeks later, Harlan Cross Medical Center held a staff meeting that was, by the standards of hospital staff meetings, unusual. Dr. Marsh had arranged it, which meant it started on time and ran without detours. The conference room on the second floor held 40 people comfortably and was standing room at the back by the time it started. Overnight staff had been asked to attend before their shifts. Day staff stayed after. The administrative staff came, which almost never happened. Marsh opened it without preamble. She explained in factual and largely unembellished terms what had happened during the overnight incident 3 weeks ago. She described the threat, the response, the outcome. She named the individuals charged, Woolley, the captured contractor, the men from the afternoon attack, and the charges against them. She described the larger federal investigation in broad terms, and then she said, the primary reason this facility and the people in it are safe is the judgment and action of one member of our staff, who made decisions in a compressed time window that required skills and experience significantly beyond her nursing role, and who made those decisions without acknowledgement, without authorization, and without any expectation of recognition. She looked at Sera, who was standing near the back of the room and had not been told this was coming. Sera Vance, Marsh said, 8 years of military service, combat-trained medic, 2 overseas deployments, and 6 years of emergency nursing at this facility, during which she never once mentioned any of that unless directly asked. A pause. I've been thinking about why. I don't think it was modesty. I think it was a choice about what mattered, and what mattered to her was the work, not the context around it. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms are quiet when 40 people are simultaneously paying attention. We are recommending her for the hospital's first Distinguished Clinical Service Award, Marsh said, and we are implementing 3 security and emergency response protocol updates based directly on the methods she used during the incident. Her name will be on the documentation of those protocols. She looked at the room, not because she asked for recognition, because accuracy matters. Sera stood at the back of the room and felt the particular discomfort of being looked at by a room full of people who were looking at her differently than they had 3 weeks ago. Not all of them. Some of the staff who had been there that afternoon had already recalibrated. But the ones who hadn't been there, the ones who knew her from 6 years of shared corridor space and shift handovers and break room coffee, those ones were doing it now, and the experience was genuinely uncomfortable in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had never wanted this. She had left the version of her life that produced this kind of attention because the attention itself had always felt like a distraction from the thing that actually mattered, which was whether the person in front of you was going to be okay. But she stood in it and didn't deflect because deflecting would have been a different kind of performance, and she was too tired for performance. After the meeting, people came to talk to her in the way people do when they've been given permission to approach someone they'd previously kept at a certain distance. Some of it was genuine, and some of it was the social machinery of an institution processing a new piece of information about one of its members. She absorbed it all with the same even attention she gave everything. Near the end of it, one of the overnight aides, a young woman named Petra, who had been working at Harlan Cross for 7 months, and who Sera knew primarily as someone who was good under pressure and asked smart questions, came up to her and said, without any of the social scaffolding that usually surrounded these conversations, "I want to do what you did. The military medical track. How do you start?" Sera looked at her. "How long have you been thinking about it?" "A while." Petra's chin was up, which meant she'd been bracing for a dismissive answer. "Everyone I mention it to says it's too hard or too long, or I'm better suited to civilian nursing." Sera thought about a version of herself at 23. In a different kind of room, being told in various polite ways that the path she wanted wasn't the right fit for someone like her. "Come find me before your next shift," she said. "I'll walk you through the actual process, not what people assume the process is. The actual one." Petra looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, with the particular nod of someone who has been carrying a weight and has just found something solid to set it on. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." She walked away, and Sera watched her go and felt something that she didn't immediately have a word for. Something in the vicinity of purpose, but more specific than that. The particular sensation of a thing passed forward instead of held. 6 weeks after the incident, she received 2 pieces of correspondence on the same day. The first was a formal letter from the Department of Justice, signed by the Inspector General, acknowledging her role in delivering evidence critical to an active federal prosecution and thanking her for her service to the public interest in terms that were official and correct and meant what they said. She read it once and put it in a drawer. The second was a handwritten note from Howard Breslin. He was, he wrote, in a new location that he couldn't specify, with a new case manager who Patel had selected personally and who was, unlike the previous one, paying attention. The surgical consult for the cardiac issue he'd been managing before the transfer had gone well. He was following up on the medication adjustment. He was, for the first time in 11 months, sleeping through the night. He wrote, "I've spent a long time wondering whether anyone in any official capacity actually saw what was in front of them. I've concluded that the right people usually do, eventually, but eventually cost something. And what I hope, what I keep coming back to, is that the cost was worth the outcome. I think it was. I think it's going to be when the trial is done. I wanted you to know that the person most responsible for the outcome being worth the cost is someone who had no obligation to be involved and chose to be anyway. That matters. I don't know another word for it except that it matters." She sat at her kitchen table and read the note twice. Then she thought about what it meant to walk away from something. She had done it 8 years ago for reasons that were real and that she didn't regret. She had built a life on the other side of that walking away that was also real and that she also didn't regret. The two things existed simultaneously without canceling each other out, which was something she'd had to work out for herself because nobody told you that was how it worked. People told you that you either committed or you left, that the choice was permanent, that who you'd been before determined who you had to be now. Nobody told you that the skills you'd built in one life didn't stop being yours just because you'd changed the context. Nobody told you that quiet wasn't the same as gone. She had spent 6 years being the nurse that nobody looked at twice. She had spent 6 years taking temperatures and organizing charts and holding the hands of patients who were frightened and checking in on the ones who pretended they weren't. She had spent 6 years being exactly what she appeared to be, a competent, undemanding, reliable member of a department that needed competent, undemanding, reliable people. And she had done it genuinely, not as cover, not as waiting, but as a real life that she was actually living. And when the building she worked in became a battlefield, she had not transformed. She had not revealed a hidden self. She had simply used more of what she already was. That was the thing nobody outside of it would quite understand, she thought. The people who would tell the story later. And she knew they would, because Patel's documentation existed, and Okafor's after-action report existed, and Marsh had attached her name to 3 protocol documents, would frame it as a revelation. The nurse who was secretly a soldier, the ordinary person who turned out to be extraordinary. But that framing got it wrong. She wasn't secretly anything. She was a nurse who had been a soldier. The nursing was not a disguise, and the soldiering was not the real truth underneath it. Both of them were real. Both of them were hers. And the decision to hold one in reserve while offering the other fully to the work in front of her hadn't been about hiding. It had been about choosing what the moment needed. The moment had kept needing different things, and she had kept having them. That was all. She put Breslin's note in the same drawer as the DOJ letter. Then she made coffee, checked the time, and got ready for her shift. On a Tuesday in March, she walked Petra through the military medical application process at a table in the hospital cafeteria during a shared break. She had a printed list of specific contacts, specific programs, and specific timelines. She had also written on a separate sheet the things nobody put in the official documentation, the parts that were hard in ways the brochure didn't mention, the points where people quit for reasons that were both understandable and survivable, the specific ways the experience would change her that she needed to be willing for. Petra read the second sheet carefully. She asked 2 questions, both sharp. Then she said, "Were you scared the first time you were in a real situation?" Sera thought about the first time. A different building, a different country, a different kind of noise. She'd been 24 years old and she'd been very scared, and the fear had been present the whole time alongside everything else. The assessment, the decision, the action. Not replacing any of it, but running concurrent with it the way background noise runs concurrent with a conversation. "Yes," she said, "the fear doesn't go away. You just get better at working alongside it." Petra nodded. The same nod from the conference room. The one that meant she'd found something solid. "I can do that," she said. "I know," Sera said. "That's why I'm talking to you." She walked back to the floor, picked up her clipboard, and started her rounds. Bay 1, Bay 2, Bay 3. Working through the board in the order the board dictated. The work ordinary and specific and necessary in the way that work is when it's the right work. In Bay 4, the new monitoring equipment had been installed 2 weeks ago. It worked correctly and consistently, which saved approximately 40 minutes of workaround per shift, and had already caught an arrhythmia that the previous equipment's lag time would have delayed flagging by several critical minutes. She documented the Bay 4 patient's readings, noted the medication schedule, and moved on. Harlan Vret's trial date was set for September. The financial forensics team had closed the chain of custody gaps using a parallel documentation set recovered from a server that Vret's people had attempted to purge and had failed to fully purge, which was the kind of operational error that happened when people assumed their institutional position made them safe from accountability. The charges now included money laundering and 2 additional conspiracy counts. His attorney's statement calling the documentation fabricated had been retracted in February after the parallel server evidence came out, and replaced with a statement that said his client looked forward to addressing the full weight of the evidence in court, which was attorney language for a difficult situation. Woolley's cooperation agreement had been finalized. He would serve time. The length was being determined with reference to the specificity and accuracy of his corroborating statement, and the early indications were that the specificity had been considerable. The families of the staff who had been put at risk during the overnight incident had been notified formally about the resolution. Sera had not been part of those notifications, which was correct. That belonged to Patel's team and the hospital administration. But she had been told they went well, which she was glad for. The 3 men from the afternoon attack and the contractor from the ceiling space had been charged federally. Their cases were moving through the system at the speed federal cases moved, which was not fast but was thorough. All of it was happening, and all of it would take time, and the time would be measured in months and years rather than hours and minutes, which was a different kind of patience than the kind she'd needed in the building, but not an entirely unfamiliar one. She finished her rounds at 4:30 p.m. and was updating charts at the nurses' station when the overnight aide Petra came by on her way to start her shift. "Dr. Marsh approved my education leave request," Petra said. She was trying to keep her voice neutral about it and not quite managing it, which was fine. "I submit the application next month." "Good," Sera said, not looking up from the chart. "Thank you." "Thank yourself. I told you the path. You chose to take it." Petra was quiet for a moment, and then she moved on down the corridor toward the start of her shift. Sera finished the chart, filed it, and picked up the next one. The department was doing its late afternoon thing. The particular rhythm of the hours before the evening surge, the board shifting, the staff moving at the specific tempo of a well-run floor, everyone knowing their role and doing it. She had spent 6 years learning this rhythm until it was hers. She had spent 6 years being exactly where she was, doing exactly this, and it had been the right choice every day she'd made it. It was still the right choice. The nurse everyone had underestimated had never needed anyone to understand that about her. She had known it herself, which was the only place it had ever needed to live. The work was what it was. It was enough. It had always been enough. She picked up the next chart and kept going.